is a conflict that has raged more than 50 years. An emotional, often bloody struggle.
These crimes against the Palestinian people.
Israel will fight. Israel will triumph.
A vicious cycle of escalation and retaliation. Of rocks met with bullets. Suicide bombings countered with tanks. Yet just 10 years ago, peace between Israelis and Palestinians seemed all but assured.
Enough of blood and tears. Enough!
A behind-the-scenes look at the Mideast peace process, from the Oslo Accord through Camp David to the present day. The secret meetings, the tough negotiations, the little-known stories.
The page that you see being signed was not the real page.
What are the enduring obstacles to peace, and can they be overcome? A look at the conflict and the clash of two peoples. A look behind the hatred, the fight for peace. On a warm day in September 1993, the South Lawn of the White House is the scene of a remarkable moment in history.
Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Chairman, this day belongs to you.
At the prompting of President Bill Clinton, two old enemies stand together on the same podium and shake hands, declaring to the world that there will be peace between their people. For PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat, the moment signifies his arrival on the world stage and a first step toward Palestinian statehood.
Mr. President, thank you, thank you, thank you.
For Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, the moment is bittersweet, filled with sadness for past bloodshed, but also with hope for the future security of his nation.
We who have fought against you, the Palestinians, we say to you today, in a loud and a clear voice, enough of blood and tears. Enough!
But it is the handshake which remains unforgettable. A simple, tangible gesture that shows it is time for peace in the Middle East.
I thought that this had to be a high point of my life and the life of all of those who participated in it, because of the decades of hostility and antagonism between the two countries, and this had so much promise.
But the promise was hollow. The stirring images from the signing of the Oslo Accord are now but a faded memory, replaced by images much less hopeful, of setbacks and failed summits, of uprisings and riots, of murders and assassinations, of suicide bombings and military strikes, an unending cycle of violence, rage, hatred, and terror, of anything and everything, it seems, except peace.
Maybe this is the most complicated conflict ever on Earth, but it won't be solved by heaven. It can be solved only by human beings.
And there lies the root of the problem. Peace must be crafted between human beings of different religions, societies, and ideologies. People with too many differences to be solved with a handshake.
People dealt with the image of that spectacle, and they said, well, we saw you signing on the White House lawn, so don't tell us about land confiscation, settlements, closures, sieges. No, that's inconsistent with the image.
Of all the obstacles to peace, none has been more bitterly divisive than land. Specifically, the tiny patch of land from which Israel was carved in 1948, a land formerly known as Palestine. The crux of the problem is how to create a homeland for displaced Arab Palestinians, while still guaranteeing the security of Israel's borders. an exchange known as Land for Peace.
This is the whole issue of the peace process, whether the Palestinian state is going to be hostile or friendly.
Israel is surrounded on three sides by the Arab countries of Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. The total land mass is just 8,000 square miles, smaller than the state of New Jersey. It is home to 5 million people, more than 4 million Jews and nearly 1 million Arab Israelis. In 1967, Israel fought all its Arab neighbors in the Six-Day War. It was a stunning victory for Israel, culminating in the seizure of what are today called the occupied territories: the Golan Heights, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. Gaza is along the southwest border, a splinter of land 28 miles long and just 5 miles wide. With nearly 1 million Palestinian residents, it has one of the highest population densities in the world. Just 18 miles east of Gaza is the West Bank, which is about a quarter the size of Israel. More than 1 million Palestinians live here. Scattered among them are more than 120 Jewish settlements, with 130,000 settlers. The Israeli government has helped establish these and 16 other settlements in Gaza, sparking anger among local Palestinians, many of whom are crammed into slums and shanty towns such as these.
It's 6 persons to a square meter, no sewage systems. There is not proper running water, not proper housing. Electricity is on and off on the hour every hour. The situation is a catastrophe.
The Jewish settlements are still expanding and protected by the Israeli army. Some settlers are Orthodox Jews who believe the land is deeded to them in the Bible.
We have to live here. This is our land. God gave us this land. We have no choice but to stay.
But others are opportunists, here for the larger houses at cheaper prices.
A house like this in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or other city will never get with this price. Never.
These settlements are a major obstacle to peace.
Settlements in the minds of the Palestinian people are not only an obstacle to peace, it's a destruction of the peace process, it's the destruction of hope.
Another major obstacle is Palestinian refugees who fled or were driven out of Israel after its creation. They hope a peace plan will allow them to return to their former homes in Israel, but Israel says that will never happen. A mass influx of Palestinians might overwhelm the Jewish population, threatening the very reason the country was established, to be a Jewish state.
There can be no refugee return into Israel. And Israel should be recognized not just as a state, as a matter of fact state, but as a Jewish state.
But the city of Jerusalem is perhaps the thorniest obstacle of all. Wedged between the West Bank and the rest of Israel, Jerusalem is the historical, spiritual, and emotional flashpoint of the Middle East. The most contested spot is a 35-acre compound known to Israelis as the Temple Mount, and to Muslims as Haram al-Sharif, or the Noble Sanctuary. Here, Jewish and Muslim holy sites sit virtually on top of each other. Both sides claim the city as their capital.
That's the hardest issue of all, because it's the one that goes most deeply to the existential sense of each party's identity.
Jerusalem, borders, security arrangements, refugees. Anyone looking at these issues would conclude that the gap between the Israeli position and the Palestinian position is at present unbridgeable.
Even the signing of the '93 Oslo Accord did not bridge these obstacles, but it did openly discuss them, leading to an historic framework for peace. What made Oslo possible, in light of the failures that followed? Perhaps something as simple as timing. In 1991, during the Persian Gulf War, Yasser Arafat sides with Saddam Hussein, which results in a loss of many of his Arab allies and their financial backing. Arafat realizes the need for serious talks with Israel. But the PLO is handcuffed by an Israeli law that forbids negotiations with the group because it is considered to be a terrorist organization. That law is repealed soon after Yitzhak Rabin is elected Israeli Prime Minister in 1992. Rabin, who campaigned on a platform of peace, is a gruff former soldier and noted hawk, which is why Israelis trust him to be a dove.
Rabin was so unique, even though he belonged to the peace camp, to the left side of the Israeli spectrum. He was considered as Israel's Mr. Security.
More than anyone, it is a Norwegian academic named Terje Larsen who brings the sides together. Larsen is the founder of an Oslo-based think tank that studies social issues around the world. While conducting a study on living conditions in the occupied territories, he makes numerous contacts with Israeli officials and PLO members.
And eventually I got to know basically everybody in the leadership, both on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side.
Larsen not only offers to put the sides in touch, he gives them a meeting place, a place that is quiet, comfortable, and most of all, neutral. The place is Norway.
Norway, over the years, had good relations to both the government of Israel and also to the PLO, and also shown great humanitarian concern for the suffering Palestinian population, but also been helping out Israel in many ways.
The first meeting is January 20th, 1993. The participants are non-traditional power brokers. Abu Allah is a Palestinian businessman, while Hassan Asfour represents the PLO's communist wing. The Israelis are a pair of young professors, Ron Pundak and Yair Hirschfeld.
It was quite amicable.
Expectations are so low, Rabin isn't even told about the meeting.
This was, from our point of view, a fact-finding mission. From our point of view, the idea was to see whether the PLO at all is a partner.
They convene at a 19th century estate just outside Oslo. The tranquil setting helps smooth nerves during introductions. The group is escorted to a small room to begin its discussions. Almost immediately, there is a feeling of optimism.
It was just a nice room, like a guest room. Two tables, one was square and one was round. Instinctively, we went to the round table. I think it said a lot. I mean, no hierarchy, no one side against the other side.
In that first meeting, the group makes perhaps its biggest breakthrough. They decide not to argue over a final peace plan, but to agree on the steps needed for an eventual accord. Called the Declaration of Principles, it is, in essence, an agreement on how to reach an agreement.
After the first initial meeting, which was the only fact-finding mission, my feeling was that we have something in our hand which, if we will play it right, will translate it into something which might create a change in the Middle East.
The parties return home to report on their progress. Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister, Yossi Beilin, decides the Oslo Channel shows enough promise to tell Rabin.
Once we came to him with the idea of Oslo, he grabbed it, but he was very, very suspicious about it.
More sessions follow in Norway. The Norwegians are pleased by the progress, but fear the talks could be derailed if word leaks out. To ensure secrecy, they frequently switch meeting locations. Finally, after 8 months of secret negotiations, an agreement is reached. The final draft of the Declaration of Principles outlines a schedule for the gradual handover of the occupied territories. The easy steps will be tackled first during a 5-year interim period. In that time, Israel will withdraw from part of the occupied territories. Palestinians will establish an authority to govern their eventual state, and their own police force, the only Palestinians allowed to have weapons. The tougher issues, such as borders, security, refugees, and Jerusalem, will not be negotiated until 1998 under a final status agreement.
All of that was postponed. We only focused on how the two sides can live together for a 5-year interim period.
On August 20th, Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres flies to Oslo for a secret ceremony to sign the declaration. The ceremony is filmed by Norwegian secret police. This is the first time it has been broadcast outside Europe. The ceremony is attended by the main negotiators. The documents are signed and followed not by a reluctant handshake, but with a warm embrace.
The biggest achievement was the fact that this piece of land will be divided between the two people.
For the document itself, I'm still proud, which I was part of this Palestinian side.
But no one at the ceremony knows what lies ahead. The trouble that not only threatens the official White House signing, but will derail the entire Oslo Accord. In a secret Oslo ceremony filmed by the Norwegian police, Israeli and Palestinian negotiators sign the historic Declaration of Principles. In spite of the warm embrace that follows, the mood of the Israelis is somber. There is tragic news from home. 7 Israeli soldiers have been killed in an ambush in Lebanon.
It was clear to me that it won't be easy. It was clear to me that, that we are signing something which is a breakthrough, but this is the first step in a very long process, which unfortunately will still demand casualties.
After the ceremony, Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres flies to a Navy base in California to break the news to U.S. Secretary of State Warren Christopher.
We went into the officers' club and he told me that they had reached an agreement in Oslo between the Palestinians and the Israelis to end their hostilities and to move toward peace. And it was really an amazing breakthrough because they'd been such long-time adversaries and enemies.
Christopher asks Mideast Special Envoy Dennis Ross to quickly read the document and give his impression.
He turned to me and said, "What do you think, Dennis?" And I said, "It's a historic breakthrough." I said, "There's more holes here than you'll find in Swiss cheese, but the fact of the matter is, it's a historic breakthrough."
Peres is aware the accord will need full U.S. backing in order to pass through the Israeli Knesset, so he makes a stunning offer.
See, actually, he was so anxious to get our support, he said, well, why don't we make this a U.S.-sponsored agreement or a U.S. agreement? And I said, couldn't do that because that didn't accord with the facts, but we would be glad to basically host the signing ceremony to show that we were fully on board.
News of the breakthrough travels fast and far.
Suddenly, after months of secrecy, no one knew about it. Suddenly, the entire world knew about it.
The official White House ceremony is scheduled for September 13th, 1993, in Washington, D.C. In addition to the Declaration of Principles, the sides agree to sign a document of mutual recognition. But on the morning of the signing, there is an urgent call to the room of Joel Singer, the Israeli team's chief legal advisor. The Palestinians want changes to the documents.
I had to ask that the ceremony's opening would be postponed by half an hour. People were standing there waiting for the trumpets to give the sign and for all the dignitaries to start walking out. No one knew that I was rushing back and forth, still negotiating the last open issues in this agreement.
The changes are made, but too late for the ceremony. Few know that the document signed before the cameras is fake.
The document that was signed was in fact a mock page because they had to reprint the real page at the White House and then we replaced it subsequently.
The last-minute glitch is a harbinger of problems to come. In May 1994, Rabin and Arafat traveled to Cairo to resolve one of the first interim steps, the handover of Gaza and Jericho to the Palestinians. But when the moment comes to sign the agreement, Arafat balks.
Here we are, the entire group on the stage, and all these television cameras trained on this signing ceremony, and Arafat said, I can't do it.
The two sides retreat to a back room and negotiate the changes Arafat wants. In the end, the document is signed, but questions remain about the Palestinian leader.
I think that's a reflection as to how difficult it is for Arafat to come to conclusions. He always wants to have one more thing.
Yet on the surface, the peace process sails ahead. Israel signs a landmark accord with Jordan, sealing peace with the second of its 4 Arab neighbors. Arafat returns from exile in Tunisia to take up residence in the West Bank, where he is greeted as the triumphant leader of the Palestinian people. And Rabin and Arafat sign Oslo II, another step in the interim agreement which expands Palestinian self-rule in the West Bank and Gaza and allows Palestinian elections. But there are setbacks too, usually sparked by extremist violence. A wave of suicide bombings in Israel by Islamic militant groups. The murder of 29 Muslims at a Hebron mosque by a heavily armed Jewish settler. Then, in 1995, comes the tragedy that many believe derails the entire peace process, the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin in Tel Aviv. It happens during, of all things, a peace rally. As Rabin walks from the stage to his car, a gunman steps from the shadow and opens fire. The news grows more shocking when the gunman's identity is revealed. He is not an extremist Palestinian, but an Israeli Jew, a 27-year-old law student named Yigal Amir, who tells police that God personally instructed him to kill Rabin.
We knew that whoever planned the assassination of Rabin, he knew that he was assassinating more than Rabin. The attempt was here to assassinate the peace process.
The effect is chilling. A draft of the final status agreement, the last step in the Declaration of Principles, is on its way to Rabin's desk.
We finalized it on the 31st of October 1995, and Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated 4 days later. He didn't see our draft. And after his assassination, actually all the cards were looking completely different.
2 prime ministers follow, the liberal Shimon Peres and the conservative Benjamin Netanyahu. Neither is able to reach a final peace agreement. But hope is rejuvenated in 1999 with the rise of a new prime minister. Ehud Barak, Israel's most decorated soldier, promises to finish a peace deal with the Palestinians and finish it fast.
We say to you today, in a loud and a clear voice, enough of blood and tears.
Now that you've seen Israel and Palestine, The Fight for Peace, Part 1, talk about this. One of the major obstacles to a lasting peace accord in the Middle East is settling who will control the city of Jerusalem. What are the key reasons for this dispute? Discuss whether the conflict between Jews and Muslims over this issue is so great that it cannot be resolved. Now, try this. As a class, research the roles that U.S. presidents and other diplomats have played in brokering peace in the Middle East. What role did President Jimmy Carter play in the peace process? For videos, CD-ROMs, lesson plans, and teacher resources on this topic and more, log on to discoveryschool.com. To learn more, Assignment Discovery suggests Waging Peace, Israel and the Arabs at the End of the Century by Itamar Rabinovich. Consider this before viewing Israel and Palestine, The Fight for Peace, Part 2. Palestinians and Israelis are the primary groups that are struggling for peace, but some extremist groups oppose the peace process. As you watch the program, take note of the tactics of these adversarial groups. What effects do their actions have? Which of their actions derail the peace process? Assignment Discovery now presents Israel and Palestine, The Fight for Peace, Part 2.
We say to you today, in a loud and a clear voice, enough of blood and tears.
Is that the only agreement you have reached so far? That would be answering a question.
It is July 2000 at Camp David, the presidential retreat in the Green Hills of Maryland. A high-stakes summit between Israel's Prime Minister Ehud Barak, Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat, and President Bill Clinton begins with sunshine and smiles. But suddenly the cameras catch this awkward, unscripted exchange. Barak and Arafat each declining to cross the threshold first.
Tried to push him, tried to avoid it. It remained imprinted on the memory of the people.
It is a small moment, but it leaves an indelible image of two men who are deeply suspicious of each other.
Arafat and Barak did not trust each other at all.
Ehud Barak comes to power in 1999, promising peace with the Palestinians. He's prepared to tackle the big issues: borders, refugees, Jerusalem. The issues that require the toughest compromises. They were set aside at Oslo, earmarked for a final agreement in 1998. After Rabin's assassination, it never happened. Now it's Barak's turn.
Peace is the essential, crucial interest of Israel. That I believe peace is also a crucial interest of the other side.
But it is months before Barak turns his attention to peace talks with the Palestinians. When he does, Arafat isn't eager to negotiate. For one thing, he feels snubbed by the Israeli leader. For another, the Palestinians believe they need more time to prepare.
We told the Americans repeatedly, do not convene Camp David, do not convene a summit, because the talks were not ripe, conditions were not ripe. The gaps were enormous between both sides.
Meanwhile, Palestinian protesters are sending their own urgent message to Washington. In May, violence sweeps the West Bank and Gaza. Demonstrations spin out of control. At one point, Israeli troops and Palestinian police exchange gunfire for the first time in years. The Palestinians are protesting the slow-moving peace process and Oslo's failure to improve their lives. Their standard of living had actually dropped 20% in the years since Oslo, and the Jewish settler population had grown by almost 80,000.
We knew what would happen if there was not an effort to break through. It was clear on balance that the risks of not acting were greater than the risks of acting.
Finally, the decision is made, and all parties agree to meet. On July 11th, Clinton prepares to welcome his guests to Camp David. With only 5 months left in office, the president is an ardent peacemaker in search of an historic deal.
The parties have proven that peace is possible when they are determined to make it.
The discussions would last 15 days. The Americans put forward what they call partial proposals. Barak agrees to hand 92% of the West Bank to the Palestinians. And on Jerusalem, he decides to do what no other Israeli leader had before him: give up part of East Jerusalem to the Palestinians.
I made one of the most kind of painful discussions that I led in my life. It was for some 6 hours with our own delegation about how to approach the issue of Jerusalem within such a framework. But I've decided that we will take it as a basis for negotiation if the other side will be ready to do so.
The Americans quickly recognize the courage that decision takes.
Prime Minister Barak was prepared to make fundamental compromises and to throw overboard some very, very difficult to discard elements of Israeli thinking. In a sense, to sacrifice some sacred cows.
The Palestinians, for their part, are feeling heat from both the Americans and Israelis to get a deal. But the Americans had failed to do advanced diplomacy and prepare other Arab leaders for a possible deal on Jerusalem. That left Arafat with no cover if he were to say yes to the new terms. And Arafat doesn't trust Barak.
We knew that Mr. Barak thought that he has the genius and he has the ingredients and he has the know-how more than Palestinians and Israel and more than many of Israeli colleagues and ministers.
The Palestinians believe the proposals will not give them a viable state, and they do not share the others' urgency to reach an agreement.
So how can you do that within a week, 10 days, even 2 weeks, on issues as crucial as the fate of 5 million Palestinian refugees?
At one point, Barak is so upset with the way things are going that he locks himself up in his cabin for more than a day, seeing no one.
And so I was working on the Palestinians. I was like, you guys are about to lose it. We got to find a way to hold this together.
The Palestinians do make concessions at Camp David, significant ones from their perspective. On Jerusalem, for instance, they accept the principle of Israeli sovereignty over the Western Wall and the Old City. But American and Israeli officials say Arafat never makes a daring counterproposal to match Barak.
There is a moment where you can see in the eyes of the other party that he is trying to strike a deal. It doesn't mean that there will be a deal. It might even explode. But at the end of it, you will know that you had been through something real. Here, it never happened to us.
An exhausted President Clinton announces the failure of the summit on July 25, 2000, choosing to lavish praise on only one of the leaders, the one with an unstable coalition at home.
Prime Minister Barak showed particular courage, vision, and an understanding of the historical importance of this moment. Chairman Arafat made it clear that he too remains committed to the path of peace.
The Palestinians feel wronged.
It was unfair. I asked President Clinton 2 months ago. I went to see him when he came to Tel Aviv. And I said to him, why did you do that, Mr. President?
But Arafat returns home to jubilant cheers. His uncompromising position at Camp David makes him a hero. A scant 2 months later, Barak's political rival, Ariel Sharon, visits a Jerusalem holy site, the noble sanctuary to Muslims, Temple Mount to Jews. Palestinians are inflamed by the visit. But Sharon says he's on a goodwill mission.
I believe that we can live together with the Palestinians.
The next day, thousands of unarmed Palestinians pelt police with rocks and bottles. The Israelis respond with rubber-coated metal bullets and live ammunition. And another cycle of violence is born, one that continues today. But there is a surprising postscript to the Camp David summit. Despite its failure and the ensuing violence, the peace process doesn't die. In January, there are new negotiations, and some participants say they come closer than ever to a deal, thanks to the legacy of Camp David.
It opened up the final status issues which had never been discussed before by the parties: Jerusalem, borders, statehood, Israeli security guarantees.
But the negotiations are cut short by an Israeli election. A new man comes to power in February 2001, and a new chapter opens in the fight for peace. Ariel Sharon's visit to Temple Mount becomes a turning point in the cycle of hatred after riots erupt and spread throughout the region. The violence escalates so quickly, so dramatically, it is soon called the Second Intifada, the Second Uprising. Many Palestinians blame Sharon for provoking the fighting, but in reality their anger has been brewing for months as their economy deteriorates and their hope fades.
An explosion was coming. We already knew it. If it wasn't this, it would have been something else.
But this uprising is fueled by a relentless pattern of escalation and retaliation. Murders by extremists, avenged by targeted killings by Israeli forces. Terrorist attacks on civilians, followed by military incursions in refugee camps. And after 2 years without a single suicide bombing, the attacks begin again. Terrorist organizations opposed to any peace plan, such as Hamas and Islamic Jihad, increased the suicide attacks. More than 70 so far, claiming more than 200 Israeli lives since the uprising began in September 2000.
You're dealing with an enemy who targets young people and children, innocent civilians, for the sake of murdering us.
There's nothing, no possible grievance that can justify sending young Palestinians into a crowded cafe in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv and murdering 30 Israelis.
But there is no shortage of rage aimed at Israel, especially in the teeming refugee camps.
People, they can't go to work. They're having a hard time even to bring some food for their children. I mean, what do you expect from the people to do?
The Israelis are driving the Palestinians to become, all of us, become suicidals.
So how many Palestinians wake up in the morning and say, that's it, enough is enough, we can't take it anymore? This is the cause.
But the bloodshed and fear seem to unite the Israeli public. The country rallies behind the man whose visit to the Temple Mount marks the start of it all in September. The tough-talking former defense minister, Ariel Sharon, a man who opposed the Oslo Accords. In February 2001, Sharon is elected prime minister, swept to power by promising to fight terrorists with terrifying force.
Israel will fight anyone who tries through suicide terrorism to sow fear.
Sharon authorizes a wide-ranging military campaign to root out terrorists, using commandos, helicopters, rockets, tanks, even full-scale incursions. Since the beginning of this intifada, Palestinians suffer nearly 3 times as many casualties as Israelis, about 1,500 Palestinians compared to 500 Israelis.
I don't think that given his way, Sharon will ever bring peace. On the contrary, I think he has brought death and destruction to both peoples.
But then in late February 2002, new hope arrives from the unlikeliest of places. A peace proposal from Saudi Arabia with a simple foundation. Not just land for peace, this time land for recognition by all 22 Arab League nations.
A peace treaty between Israel and all the Arab countries, which has never been offered before. And this for the return of land. Surely this, if it is security that Israel is looking for, this is the road to security.
On its surface, the proposal intrigues all sides.
Any initiative that supports or brings about peace between Israel and the Arab world is something that Israel must support.
I think it's the most significant development in Arab modern history since 1948.
But the plan is imperiled by many of the same old obstacles. Questions over settlements, refugees, and Jerusalem. And the entire peace process is now burdened by yet another barrier, entrenched hatred, which has escalated to the point where it is a formidable obstacle in and of itself. It is March 27th, 2002, the start of Passover, one of the most important dates in the Jewish calendar. But the celebrations don't last. Not on this night, not in Israel. At 7:15 p.m. in the lobby of the Park Hotel in Netanya, a suicide bomber from the militant Islamic group Hamas detonates a 22-pound bomb. 140 are injured. It is the worst attack since this intifada started.
It's simply a butchery. That's what you see here, a slaughterhouse.
President Bush condemns the attack and demands action from Yasser Arafat.
I call upon Mr. Arafat and the Palestinian Authority to do everything in their power to stop the terrorist killing.
Until now, Israel's military has answered the bombings with quick raids into Palestinian towns to hunt down militants and their weapons. The Passover bombing changes everything.
if we are going to take all the necessary measures to act and destroy the infrastructure of every terror element that exists.
Israeli tanks are rolling through the West Bank even as the Israeli Prime Minister speaks. Operation Defensive Shield has begun, the biggest Israeli military operation in 2 decades. Tanks move into Ramallah, crashing into Arafat's compound, taking on Palestinian gunmen, cutting off power, leaving Arafat with a cell phone, a gun, and little else for the next 34 days. The Israelis also ransacked Palestinian government offices.
The Ministry of Education, they had destroyed it. Why? Give me one reason. Why?
April 1st, Israeli tanks enter Bethlehem. Armed Palestinians take refuge in the Church of the Nativity and remain holed up there under siege by Israeli troops for 39 days. Days later, the troops go into Jenin refugee camp. Israel says Jenin is a military stronghold, home to a score of suicide bombers. The fighting here is furious, house to house, with civilians caught in the middle. Palestinians call it a massacre. Human Rights Watch, the US-based organization, says there's no evidence to support that accusation. It says 52 Palestinians were killed, more than half of them armed fighters. But the group says Israeli troops used excessive and indiscriminate force. Israel, which lost 23 soldiers, denies the charge. President Bush now calls on the Israeli leader to stop.
I ask Israel to halt incursions into Palestinian-controlled areas and begin the withdrawal from those cities it has recently occupied.
Sharon ignores the US president. Israel claims it has discovered documents that prove Arafat is supporting the suicide bombers.
We found that the same hand that Arafat used to sign the various Oslo agreements was the hand that he used to sign documents in Arabic that authorized payment to suicide bombers.
Arafat angrily denies the charge.
Give me what evidence. أنا بتحداك. I challenge you. I challenge you.
Operation Defensive Shield ends 6 weeks after it starts. But the suicide bombings do not. May 7th, as Sharon meets Bush in the White House, a suicide bomber strikes at a pool hall south of Tel Aviv. 15 Israelis are killed, 58 are injured. May 27th, an Israeli baby and her grandmother are killed at a cafe near Tel Aviv. June 5th, 17 people on a bus are blown up, most of them Israeli soldiers. It is a numbing litany of death with no end in sight, and it breeds fierce hatred among Israelis.
We made it through the Nazi Holocaust, and we're going through a second Holocaust led by Yasser Arafat.
The hatred is just as fierce on the Palestinian side. Every day they endure the humiliation of living under an occupying force.
You know, they are going to commit more suicide because of the Israeli actions.
A decade ago, both sides were trying to build trust. Today, they are building walls.
It's a tragedy. Both sides have paid a terrible price. The longer it's gone on, the deeper the hole has become, the harder it is to dig out.
The question is, what now? Sharon demands a ceasefire before any peace talks can start. He holds Arafat responsible for the violence. And in June, after yet another suicide bombing, he sends troops back into Arafat's compound. A show of force against a Palestinian leader he loathes.
The only way we're ever going to get a breakthrough with the Palestinians is if a future Palestinian leader replicates the Sadat model, put violence, put terrorism behind us, and negotiate with Israel freely.
Whether Arafat can control the extremists is an open question. But talk of a successor to the man who won international recognition for the Palestinian cause outrages those close to him.
I believe this is shameless. Such questions are really shameless. Because Arafat was elected directly by the Palestinian people.
At the same time, few Palestinians believe that Sharon could ever be a serious peace partner.
This illusion that he has, that he can defeat the will of a people by use of arms, by killing, by destroying, by demolishing our homes, our infrastructure, our lives, our economy. This is, I mean, we should have learned the lessons of history. This has never worked.
With so much mistrust, there are calls for more American involvement.
There may need to be a change of leadership in one or both countries before we make progress, or the United States may need to get much more heavily involved than we are now.
In the meantime, both sides spend their days burying the dead. While it seems that hopes for peace are being buried too, the majority of Israelis and Palestinians not only believe in peace, they long for it. And they know too well the obstacles that must be overcome, obstacles that have prevented peace since the conflict was born. The land, the refugees, the settlements, Jerusalem, and of course, the hatred. Back in 1993, on a September day bright with promise, it seemed as if the fight for peace had ended in triumph. Israelis and Palestinians are again in need of two leaders who can put the hatred behind them, who can shake hands and say together, enough is enough.